Hey, what's up everyone, Brandon Hart here, and welcome to the very first video from a new series called Procreate. The purpose behind this series is to predominantly recreate famous guitar tones, and I'm really excited to show you how I attained one of my favorite guitar tones ever from Nickelback's album, All the Right Reasons. For years now, I've been trying to replicate this guitar tone, and I have had no luck whatsoever. That all changed when I got my hands on PETRUCCI X from Neural DSP. The first thing that I did is I pulled up an instance of the rhythm amp. I kept the gain at its default state. I pulled back the tight knob just a touch, and this allowed for some looseness in my guitar playing. Only thing that the bass knob is a high pass. It just allows for all those beautiful frequencies to come through, and a lot of times you want to capture that, especially when it comes to an early 2000s guitar tone. And then I pulled back the mids, I boosted the treble, I boosted the presence, and then I pulled back the master just a touch, and this gave me some extra headroom before hitting the other plugins that are going to come later in this video. And then for the cab section, I used the rhythm cab. I love the dynamic 421. It's able to pick up so much detail, especially in the pick attack. And my other new favorite is actually the dynamic 2500. And then once I dialed in the head and the cab, I went back to the overdrive pedal and I boosted the drive just a touch. I push it until I hear a noticeable difference, and then once I find that sweet spot, sometimes I back it off just a touch to give it a little bit of headroom. And I also boosted the tone a touch to give it some more bite. And with the EQ, I pulled back 60 Hz by around -2 dB. I decreased the 300 Hz range by around -1 dB. I decreased 700 Hz to around 4 dB. And then I boosted the 7 to 8K range by around 6 dB. And following PETRUCCI X, I pull in an instance of Pro Q3. And before you start commenting, wow, that EQ looks absolutely insane, just know that there was a lot of A/B comparisons between the original Nickelback guitar tone and the PETRUCCI X tone. With this, I did a dynamic EQ cut by 4 dB around 144 Hz. I did a bunch of narrow EQ cuts at 511 Hz by -6.8 dB. And I also did the same at 650 Hz by -5.8 dB. I cut 1100 Hz by -1.8 dB, as well as a touch of 1.6K by -2 dB. I think one of the more annoying frequencies that I heard the tone out of PETRUCCI X is around the 2500 Hz range, so I cut that by -4.8 dB. And one thing to note about 1.5 and 2.5K is this is where a lot of the bite is found in your guitar tone, so you want to make sure that if you are going to cut these frequencies, they're fairly narrow cues, unless you just have a terribly dialed in guitar tone, which in this case, I played really close attention with getting everything to the final tone before I implemented other EQs. And I found a touch of harshness around the 5800 range, and I pulled that back by 4.5 dB. One thing to note about Nickelback's All the Right Reasons tone is, I don't really want to use this word, but it's the only word that comes to mind, and that is gnarly. There's something really interesting that's happening with the high end, especially around 7.5K and up. For me, it was really tricky to be able to dial that in. That said, I boosted 7800 Hz with a 48 dB per octave bell boost by 10 dB. And then I boosted 12K by 14 dB with a 2.7 Q, while cutting the 14K range by 10 dB with a 48 dB per octave bell cut. Then the final stage of processing is pulling in the virtual mix rack from Slate Digital. And with this, I implemented a touch of FGN, which is emulating a classic Neve console. The only thing that I'm doing with this is pulling back the 40 Hz range by 0.8 dB. And one thing with this EQ that's kind of known is it's a really powerful EQ. That 0.8 dB could probably equate to around -1.5 to -2 dB. In this final instance within the virtual mix rack is the FGS, which emulates an SSL module. I found that when A/Bing this with the original guitar tone as well as slotting this in the mix, there were a lot of issues in the 2.1K range. I pulled back this frequency to around 6.8 dB with a 1.5 Q. And to give this guitar tone a touch of body, I boosted the 110 Hz range by 1.2 dB.